So when it comes to painting the background for your embroidery, you need to think about what your embroidery is going to be used for. If it's going to be on anything that's going to be washed, like clothing or something like that, then it needs to be fabric paint. In which case you need to stick to your fabric paints and iron them after you've painted them on and that sort of thing. For today's project, it's going to be hung on a wall, so I don't have to worry about washing it. So that gives me the luxury of using acrylic paints. So with acrylic paints, or with any paint that you're painting for a background of an embroidery, you need to remember that you really are just doing the background. So it doesn't need to be a solid layer of color or have any depth or details put into it, because the details you're going to do all with your thread. So you want to just put your paint as thinly as possible onto your fabric. Even that may just be a little bit too thick, but you want it as thin as possible. You're just trying to create something, just get away from having a white background if you're painting on white fabric or whatever your background color is. You're just trying to break that up so that when you are stitching over it, you've got some color behind there to work with. It just makes it a lot easier than trying to cover up your white or whatever color your background is. Because you need to remember that all your acrylic paints, your fabric paints, all those type of paints, they're all microplastic based. So they will create a layer of color on top of your fabric, whereas you want your paint to be going into your fabrics as much as possible. So just bear that in mind when you're applying. The two methods would be to use no water at all, so it's a dry brush with paint straight out the tube and you're just brushing it on. Or the other method is to go the other extreme, which is to use really watered down paints, turning them into almost like a fabric dye, and then blobbing your paints on. You can spray them on a spray bottles, that sort of thing, to create a more covered background. But if you're just wanting to do one little creature, like in today's picture, I'm just doing the little mouse. So for that mouse, I literally just painted the background of the mouse and left everything else white. I also painted the clouds as well. I'll be going a lot more in depth into fabric paint and different techniques when I'm busy with a gel plate, learning how to use the gel plate and figuring out different techniques, so I can do a tutorial on that for you. So I'll go more into fabric paints and acrylic paints and the differences on that tutorial. But for today, just stick to it as light as possible, just to take out the background color and give yourself a base to embroider on top of. One more thing that I do want to add, which is quite important: your water-soluble pen. Now, when it comes to acrylic paint doesn't necessarily, it all depends on the paint brand, but it doesn't necessarily have enough water in it to remove the pen. So quite often when you paint on top of it, some of that water-soluble pen will remain, and then it gets trapped between the fabric and the paint, so it never disappears. So just be aware of that if you, when it comes to your designs, you probably want to use chalk or a very light pencil line instead of your water-soluble pens if you're doing paint or fabric paint or acrylic paints. So just to show you that it hasn't come out all the way, which it would have ordinarily with water. So in order to set your machine up for free motion embroidery, you need to be putting an embroidery foot on your machine. It either looks like this, with a circle, or this is a darning foot. It works just as well. I used this for many years before I got my hands on one of these. I usually match my bobbin thread to the background fabric, but you can, especially if you're working on a finer fabric, you might want to match your bobbin thread to your embroidery work. Put your needle in the middle position. You want to be on a straight stitch. You want to set your stitch length to a 0 so that you're in complete control of what's happening in your machine. And your tension, you can play around with your tension. I usually put mine at about 3.5 for machine embroidery, but you can, the higher your tension or lower your tension, and you'll see it'll give you different effects as you're sewing. So that's great fun to play with. Right, because I'm working on a white background, I've put a white bobbin in here. For me, I like to match my bobbin thread to my background fabric, but you could also match it to the color of the picture you're doing. A lot of that will depend on the thickness of your fabric, because you don't want another colour shining through. So. Right, so for this mouse, I'm just going to do an outline stitch everywhere, fill it in, and then I'll go around with a darker grey and do the shading details. So again, start in the middle, well, closest to the edge, but not on the very edge. One revolution with your hand wheel, just to pull your bobbin thread through. Now, start. Always make sure that your foot is down, because it's quite easy to forget that when you're working. Okay, a few stitches to secure. Just gonna cut off our top thread so they don't get tangled, so we don't have to worry about those anymore. So because of the shape of the mouse, I'm going to do my stitch direction in the direction of the arm for this one. So parts where I know I'm going to be doing shading with the darker thread, I am leaving that but slightly less dense with the stitches so that it's easy to go over the top of these ones. And just to show you quickly, I've done the one shade of grey. I'm probably going to incorporate 2 to 3 different shades of grey to create the depth that I need. Just to show you what it looks like when we've done the very base layer of grey. As you can see, I've left quite a few gaps between my stitches because you don't want to build it up too much initially. It makes it very hard for the machine to stitch through those and you might end up breaking a needle. So for now I've just done the one shade, and I'll show you as I go. So just to show you how I do my filling stitches, I do this sort of, if you know hand embroidery, you'll know a short and long stitch. So that's pretty much what I replicate when I do my filling stitches, for especially when it comes to an animal that's got different directions of its fur. So let me show you what I mean. So you can see I've got my background color and then I've got all the gaps in between. So for here I'm doing the shading under the arm. Okay, so that's for the shading. Now let me just show you how I do the outline stitch. So if you go slowly, you can create an actual solid line of stitching. You don't want to go too slowly because you're going to end up breaking your needle. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit more shading under the face. Alright, next we're going to go to a lighter grey, and then I'll go back to another darker grey once I've done some lighter grey shading. So when you want to jump to a different part of your design, you want to pull your top, you lift up your bobbin, your presser foot, you pull your top thread in a loop like that, and you move to the next side of your design. Drop your presser foot down, you do a few stitches to secure it, and then you can continue to sew as before, making sure you don't sew over this loop too many times. If you do find that it's getting in the way, then you can obviously just trim them off as you're working. Okay, so I'll start my tail. So as you can see, I'm creating quite a thick, dense layer of stitching here, and that I'm doing by moving my hoop slowly and just overlapping the stitches ever so slightly. So short, long, short, long. And I'm going to continue to do that for the whole tail. So often you'll find as you're working that you need to flip your hoop. You'll be working, quite often you'll be working with your design upside down. It's completely normal. So I cut my top threads as close to the stitching as I can without snipping through any threads. The bottom side I leave a little bit longer. You want to be leaving your back threads. You don't want to cut those too much because it just helps to not bring your threads through, that your threads don't come through to the top due to wear and tear. If you're going to be using your embroidery on an item of clothing that's going to get washed often, then you might want to cut these threads a little bit longer, pull them through to the back. That you do by just pulling on one of these threads, and you'll see the little loop of colour thread comes through there. You pull that up and you tie a knot. Because this is just going to be a picture for the wall, I don't need to worry with that. So I'll leave my back threads as long as possible. That's because I'm using a thick fabric that's not going to show the threads in the front. So I can leave my back threads where they are, and then just cut my front threads as close to the work as possible. So next I'm going to do the white tummy. Then I'll do a very light grey just to create the shading for the tummy and going into the actual body of the mouse. Okay, so that's my white tummy. Now I'm going to put in my very lightest grey. I feel like our little mouse is getting there. I'm going to go with a slightly darker grey and just accentuate our shadow areas. And then we'll put the eyes on, eyes and nose. Our little mouse is coming on. Now we just need to decide where we're going to put our eyes. We can put a little mark here. This is a water erasable marker. So we can remember to put them. Now the eyes that you give your creature gives it its personality. So for this one I'm going to do little closed eyes. Something along these lines. Okay, so that's what its eyes will look like. But over there. Right, so I finished with the machine embroidery section of my picture. I'm going to be doing the cloud with needle felting, and then I'll be doing the raindrops with just seed stitch, hand embroidery seed stitch. And the last thing to decide is what exactly the little mouse is sad about. If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel while you're there. Okay, so we're going to needle felt our cloud now. So in order to do that, just take it off the ring for a moment. You can needle felt without the ring. First we remove the backing. That's because this fabric is thick enough to hold the needle felting without it, and it's easier to felt into fabric without that. You don't have to put the hoop back on. For this one I'm going to, just because my previous needle felting onto fabric buckled, and for this, because I'm so close to the end now, I don't want to have to anything to mess it up. But yeah, you don't have to use your hoop for needle felting. That's just my choice for this particular project. Right, so for needle felting into fabric, I've got my sponge to protect my table, felting needle. This is just a medium felter. Then we'll start with a white, and then for the inside, and then as I've done the background painting here, again as thin as possible, because you don't want to, as you see, when it penetrates the fabric, you don't want to have a thick layer of paint that then makes a hole. So pull off a thin bit there, and it will just start. I always have a felting thing that's got a number of needles in it. So for this, just to make it go a bit faster. So putting the light grey on top. followed by darker grey around the edges. Okay, so I'm felting a lot around the edges and less in the middle, just to create a sort of slight 3D effect on my cloud. And building up the layers of colours as I go. Okay, and then get it off so you can see what it looks like at the back. A lot of people work backwards when it comes to felting, and then this will be their right side. For me, I like to work on the front side like that. For the rain, I'm using the lightest blue that I've got. It's so light blue it's almost white. I'm using, so this is a 6-strand embroidery cotton. I'll be dividing it and using 2 of the strands. You see, of the 6, just peel off 2. Right, so now we're just going to do the seed stitch for the rain and the lightest blue that we've got. And seed stitch quite simply is a straight in and out stitch, like so. So I finished needle felting the cloud. I've done a seeding stitch or a spread out running stitch for the rain. And now the last thing to do is just to get rid of the blue, which is my water erasable marker. So for that I'm just going to use a spray bottle and keep it in the hoop just to make sure that my fabric doesn't buckle as this is drying. That's it for this week's tutorial. As always, we ask that you subscribe to the channel, and if you like this video, please click on the like button. See you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.